Welcome to Books on Point. Untimely Beginnings is a collection of 18 deeply personal essays from South African women who were younger than 50 years old when their husbands passed away. They were in their prime years, not expecting loss so soon. These were heartfelt narratives told with honesty and clarity of mind, years after all the stories chronicled the women's journeys with death, grief and grieving, and navigating life on their own with children, and of course the processes of reliving and navigating the life as a single woman and as single mothers. The essays include women who lost husbands through illness, car accidents, apartheid, police brutality and suicide. For more on the book, we're joined by compiler Nandi Mjo Manentsa. Nandi, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Anastasia.
So let's talk about what inspired you to compile this book together.
Actually, it is interesting. It was by default, if I may say so. I worked in the motor industry in 2015. There was a lady I worked with, Linda Mjo. She had lost her husband 4 years before we actually met. She used to come to my office because we worked together and would talk for hours on end. She would be telling me about her husband, Siabulela, what happened, how sad she was feeling, how her children were missing him. It was his birthday today, and so forth. So one day I thought to myself, wait a minute, Linda, maybe we should write about our stories because there is a compelling reason to do so. And she said to me, I think we should. In fact, we should. So then we left it there until a few months later, I had a dream. Sometimes I dream about things. I dreamt about a lady who was going to publish a book I was going to write. So I woke up in the morning and I thought I had better get started. So that is how the journey started.
Talk to me about the selection criteria of these 18 women. They all come from various backgrounds, various social spheres in life. What kind of process did you go through in terms of selecting these particular essays from these 18 women?
Wonderful. Well, I'm one of those women. As for the rest, my sister-in-law, I already knew about her situation. She had lost her husband younger herself. Linda was one of the people I was going to approach. I had other cousins and friends that I knew lost husbands younger. And again, by word of mouth, I would speak to a person and they would refer me to another person. I would interview a woman and she would say, oh my goodness me, this is cathartic. And they would say, I know of somebody else. I know of a Sipatin Langeni. You may want to speak to her. And all of them had lost husbands younger than 50. So the process just went on like that, word of mouth, and people, referring me to the next person and the other. I actually ended up interviewing 22 women. Closer to the time, though, others pulled out for various reasons. And I think sometimes the pulling out was also important because maybe all that was needed was an engagement, a voice, or to vent things out, but not to publish. So that is how I selected the ladies.
All right. In your particular essay, you talk about how your employers were very supportive, in helping you navigate and go through what you experienced. Speaking as somebody who is a director in HR, as the work that you do, how important is it for the workplace to create an environment for women or perhaps even, employees who've lost a loved one to be able to cope?
In fact, empathy has never been as important as it is today, especially when we look at the coronavirus and its devastating effect on families, isolation, depression, and all of that. And maybe at some point deaths, we have had deaths in our country. So empathy is very important, and well-being and wellness in the workplace, because you need to understand the space a person is at, because they cannot deliver or perform optimally if they are bugged or worried about something. It is therefore important as an employer to connect with employees, find out how are you doing, where are you at, how are you feeling this morning, how are your children, how is your husband, how is your family. What are your fears, especially at this time? And when we connect as employers, you are fully engaging the individual and thus have them coming to work with everything else that is about them at that point in time. So it is never about you leave your problems at the door. It is about we want you in full, and we just as human as you are, and we'll help you in whatever way we can. So I worked at Nedbank, if I may say so, that time. And my employers, because I was younger then, my employers reached out to me. They offered psychological help, but of course I denied it. I said I didn't need it because I thought, oh, they want to tell me to move on with my life. I don't want to move on with my life because I want my husband back. I refused it. But in retrospect, I should have said, yes, I need it. So that's what we should do as families, even, and people in congregations, in whatever forms of life, including family.
Right. We'll get to the topic of mental health shortly, but the one thing that I noticed in one of your essays, you talk about how you had to plug yourself into your work in order to be able to, forget the pain that you were going through. Let's look back at, your achievements so far. I mean, hindsight, as you mentioned, when you look back, what have you learned about yourself and how have you become stronger over the years?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've learned so many things about myself. I never knew I could be resilient. I grew up in an overprotective family environment, and so initially I lost my faith, I must just say, but over time I put all of I could in my work. I even decided, because then my mother died a year later, I decided to study. But my siblings, my dad, my mother were there for me. Friends I grew up with, and most of all, even my in-laws, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my husband's siblings, all rallied around me. I think without their support, I would not be as resilient as I became. So it was a collective group of people, and those who were unfriendly or nasty, actually, they made me to be stronger. So I'm grateful for all of the experiences, if you ask me.
Right. You talk about, the impact your mother had and the effect that she had on the family and her strength. Let's talk a little bit about your childhood. What was that like?
Well, I grew up in a family of 5, me being the firstborn, and 2 brothers and 2 sisters, with a loving mother and a father. Our environment was overprotected. I grew up in Tanzania. I was born in East London. We moved to Tanzania in the Eastern Cape. So it was a loving environment, a family that had music. And interestingly, when I reflect, my father was a storyteller himself, and so was my mother. So we're told stories about apartheid, stories about music, stories about legends, stories about what it means to be an African child. So many things. And so I learned from that environment all of, what life is all about. And music in my family was also a big thing. Music, we love music when we are sad, when we are happy. And I think also music was part of my resilience, because sometimes I would just put on a song that I used to listen to growing up. So we had loving environments and loving families. In our townships those days, there was a sense of community. So it was not just your family, but it was everybody else surrounding you. And every mother and father who was a neighbor was your mother. And your teachers, everybody, there was a sense of community and love for an African child. Yeah.
Right. So we were talking about mental health a little bit earlier on, and in this particular time, as you mentioned in one of your responses around the coronavirus, it becomes very difficult for most families to be able to deal, especially if you've lost a particular loved one during this stage. When you talk about, you wish in hindsight that you had, taken on that advice to go and seek, help to be able to deal with your grief. how important is it now for people to consider that, that kind of help that you need, seeing that it can be a pretty isolating time right now with, the social distancing and the working from home and not being able to be around with family as you normally would under normal circumstances?
Okay. Thank you for that, Nastasia. There are trade-offs. There are good things about the lockdown, good things being you can then bond with your family. If you are a working father or mother, you can now bond with your children because you seldom ever see them. And maybe you would skip praying if you're a praying family. Now you have an opportunity to do so with your children and teach them values of work, values of balancing work and life, because now you have to decide what the family schedule is going to look like by also incorporating their feedback in terms of what needs to be done as a family. But also the downside is exactly that. It can be isolation because you're feeling so alone. You're feeling this has been imposed on you. It is not your choice. So as a result, there's that sense of feeling I am imprisoned. However, you need to talk to other people, not people who are negative or as scared as you are. So if you are engaging, a lot of people are anxious about it, it is not going to help you. It's going to exacerbate the situation. Right. So it is important to seek psychological counseling, speak to social workers, speak to your priest or your minister, speak to people who can help you see your way through it. But I love reading. Also, it is good to read because you sort of connect and you can get stories that detract you from the whole negativity of coronavirus. We also need to have faith and know that things will be better. I'm an optimist. So they do get better.
Well, I'm glad that you're an optimist, Nandi, but unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. That is the compiler of the book, Untimely Happenings. Of course, that is Nandi Mjo Manentsa, who is the author of the book. That's it from me. We'll be back with more news at the top of the hour.